Welcome to Mystery Tales, dear listeners. I'm your host, Alex, and tonight we're diving into a brand new original mystery in the timeless style of Agatha Christie. If you're settling in with a cup of tea or perhaps a glass of sherry, get comfortable. This is Hercule Poirot and the Shattered Bond Betrayal, a long-form tale designed for those cozy evenings when you want to lose yourself in deduction and drama. We'll unfold it chapter by chapter, slow and deliberate, just like a gentle stroll through the English countryside. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. London, New York, or somewhere more exotic? Your stories make this community special. Now let's step back to the 1920s, to the opulent Hargrove Manor, a sprawling country estate on the outskirts of London where secrets lurk behind every polished door. Chapter 1. Introduction and Setup. The autumn of 1925 arrived at Hargrove Manor like a guest who had overstayed his welcome. Damp, insistent, and impossible to ignore. The great house stood 3 miles beyond the sleepy village of Lower Brimstead, wrapped in beech woods that had turned the color of dried blood. From the gravel sweep in front of its Palladian facade, one could see the chimneys of London on a clear day, though clear days had been in short supply since September. Sir Reginald Hargrove had built his fortune on steel and silence. The mills in Sheffield bore his name, the contracts in the city bore his signature, and the family who lived beneath his slate roof bore, whether they admitted it or not, the weight of his expectations. At 62, Sir Reginald was a broad-shouldered man with iron-gray hair and a voice that could slice through boardroom chatter as cleanly as a bandsaw through tin. He had summoned his household and a handful of others for what he termed in his curt telegram, a weekend of reconciliation. Reconciliation. The word had hung in the air like cigar smoke ever since the telegrams were delivered. Hercule Poirot, the celebrated Belgian detective, was not among the invited. He was at that moment installed in the modest guest room of his old friend Captain Arthur Hastings, some 12 miles away at Willowbank Cottage. Poirot had arrived the previous week complaining of a chill upon the chest, and had spent his days rearranging the ornaments on the mantelpiece and lecturing Hastings on the correct way to brew tisane. Mon cher Hastings, he had announced that very morning, setting down his cup with delicate precision. I find the English countryside most restorative to the little gray cells, provided one is not required to walk in it. A puzzle, yes, a murder, no. I am for once content to be retired. Hastings buttering toast with the absent-minded enthusiasm of a man who had never quite mastered the art had merely grinned. Famous last words, old boy. Back at Hargrove Manor, the first motor car crunched up the drive at 4:30 on Friday afternoon, scattering wet gravel like buckshot. It was a sleek midnight blue Rolls-Royce Phantom, and from it stepped Lady Eleanor Hargrove, wife of 25 years and mistress of a house that had never quite felt like home. She was still beautiful at 48, though beauty in Lady Eleanor had always been of the fragile frost-pattern variety, likely to crack if looked at too hard. Her coat was sable. Her hat was the exact shade of a winter sky, and the gloved hand she extended to the butler, Jenkins, trembled only slightly. "Jenkins," she said, her voice low and musical, "is Sir Reginald in the study?" "He is, your ladyship, and in a temper, if I may say so." "You may not," she replied, but there was no sting in it. She had long ago learned that Jenkins's observations were as reliable as the grandfather clock in the hall and twice as loud. Inside, the entrance hall smelled of beeswax, wood smoke, and the particular chill that settles into old houses when the fires have only just been lit. Portraits of previous Hargroves glared down from the paneling. Admirals, mill owners, one unfortunate bishop who had died of apoplexy at the dinner table. Lady Eleanor paused beneath the newest edition. Sir Reginald himself, painted 5 years earlier, staring out with the faint suggestion that he already knew what you were going to say and had decided it was wrong. The next arrival was Edward Hargrove, the only son, who roared up in a canary-yellow Bentley that looked as though it had been driven through several hedges and one cocktail party. Edward was 32, tall, and possessed of the sort of careless good looks that persuade creditors to wait another month. He flung his motoring coat at Jenkins with the carelessness of a man who had never carried his own luggage and demanded whiskey before he had even removed his goggles. "Father in one of his moods?" he asked, striding toward the drawing room. "I couldn't possibly comment, sir," Jenkins replied, which meant yes. Amelia Hargrove arrived more quietly by train and then taxi, stepping down onto the gravel in a dove-gray traveling suit and a cloche hat pulled low over her bobbed chestnut hair. At 24, she carried herself with the bright defiance of the post-war generation. But her eyes, hazel like her mother's, betrayed a weariness that no amount of lipstick could hide. She kissed Lady Eleanor on the cheek, embraced Edward with rather less enthusiasm, and asked Jenkins whether the post had come. "There was a letter for you, Miss Amelia. I placed it on the salver in your room." Amelia's fingers tightened on her handbag. "Thank you, Jenkins." Mr. Victor Blackwood was next, emerging from a dignified Daimler with the air of a man who had never been late for anything in his life. 55, lean as a greyhound, with a mustache clipped so precisely it might have been drawn with a ruler. He was Sir Reginald's business partner, co-owner of Hargrove and Blackwood Steel, and the only man in Yorkshire who could make the word profit sound like a threat. He carried a pigskin briefcase that never left his side and greeted Lady Eleanor with a bow so crisp it might have snapped. "Eleanor, my dear. Still the loveliest ornament in any room." "Victor," she said coolly, "you always did know how to make a woman feel like a chandelier." Miss Clara Winters arrived last of the inner circle, stepping off the London train with 2 suitcases and the anxious expression of a woman who had never quite believed she belonged anywhere. She was 35, neat as a pin, with brown hair pinned tightly and spectacles that magnified eyes the color of weak tea. For 10 years she had been Sir Reginald's private secretary, guardian of his appointments, his secrets, and, though no one spoke of it, his unspoken affections. She greeted the family with a nervous bob that was half curtsy, half apology, and hurried upstairs to make sure Sir Reginald's papers are in order. Finally, there was Jenkins himself. 60 years old, tall, thin, and upright as a guardsman, he had been butler at Hargrove Manor since before Edward was born. His face was a mask of perfect impartiality, but those who knew him well could detect the faintest tightening at the corners of his mouth when he was displeased, and he was often displeased. The weekend's ostensible purpose was reconciliation. But by the time the gong sounded for dinner at 8 o'clock, the air in the drawing room crackled with everything that had never been reconciled. Sir Reginald entered last, filling the doorway like a storm front. He wore evening dress with the severity of a uniform, and the ruby pin in his tie glinted like a drop of fresh blood. "Good evening," he said, and the temperature seemed to drop 5 degrees. "I trust we are all prepared to behave like civilized people for once." Edward raised his glass in a mock toast. "To family, darling Papa. May we all survive the weekend." Amelia flinched. Lady Eleanor stared into the fire. Victor Blackwood's smile never reached his eyes. Clara Winters stood near the door as though ready to bolt. Only Jenkins, circulating with the sherry decanter, appeared unmoved. Dinner was announced. They filed into the dining room beneath the gaze of a dozen crystal chandeliers, their reflections shivering in the polished mahogany table. The menu was elaborate: clear soup, sole in white wine, roast pheasant, charlotte russe. But conversation was sparse. Sir Reginald spoke of business, falling share prices, unreliable suppliers, the need for loyalty in difficult times. Edward drank too much claret and laughed too loudly at his own jokes. Amelia pushed food around her plate. Lady Eleanor's fingers worried at the stem of her glass until it seemed it must snap. At one point, Sir Reginald fixed his gaze on his daughter. "Amelia, I have decided to alter certain arrangements. We will discuss them tomorrow." Amelia's fork clattered against her plate. "What sort of arrangements?" "The sort that concern your future," he said, "and the future of this family." Edward leaned forward, eyes bright with wine and malice. "Let me guess, Father. You're cutting me off again." "I am considering what is best for the estate," Sir Reginald replied. "Loyalty must be earned." Victor Blackwood cleared his throat. "Reginald, perhaps this is not the moment." "It is precisely the moment," Sir Reginald cut in. "I have spent a lifetime building something. I will not see it squandered by ingratitude." Clara Winters made a small, distressed sound. Lady Eleanor rose abruptly. "If you'll excuse me, I have a headache." Sir Reginald did not look at her. "Of course." The meal limped to its conclusion. Coffee was served in the drawing room, but no one lingered. One by one, the guests drifted away. Lady Eleanor to her boudoir, Edward to the billiard room with a fresh bottle, Amelia to the library where she stared unseeing at a volume of Shelley, Blackwood to the telephone in the hall to make a mysterious call, Clara to her little office adjoining the study. At 10:30, Sir Reginald announced that he would work for an hour in his study and was not to be disturbed. He strode down the east corridor, his footsteps echoing on the black and white tiles. The study door, solid oak, fitted with a Yale lock and a bolt on the inside, closed behind him with a decisive click. The key turned. The bolt shot home. From the hallway, Jenkins watched the door for a long moment, then turned away to supervise the locking up. The house settled into its nightly rhythm, clocks ticking, fires sinking into embers, the wind prowling around the eaves like a restless dog. Upstairs in the blue guest room, Amelia Hargrove opened the letter that had been waiting on her salver. The handwriting was Geoffrey's, hurried, passionate, desperate. "Cannot bear another day without you. If your father will not listen, we must take matters into our own hands. Meet me tomorrow night by the old boathouse. Come alone. I love you beyond reason." She pressed the letter to her lips, tears blurring the ink. Then she burned it in the grate, watching the flames devour every word. In the billiard room, Edward chalked his cue with unnecessary force and miscued 3 shots in a row. In her boudoir, Lady Eleanor sat before her mirror, brushing out her long dark hair with mechanical strokes while memories of a painter in Florence, of laughter in a sunlit studio, rose unbidden. In the study, Sir Reginald poured himself a whiskey from the crystal decanter, sat heavily at his desk, and opened the folder marked Last Will and Testament. He stared at the neatly typed pages for a long time. Then he took up his pen. Outside, the wind strengthened, rattling the tall windows of the study that overlooked the rose garden. Inside, the fire crackled. The clock on the mantel struck 11. No one saw the shadow that moved briefly across the moonlit lawn. No one heard the faint scrape at the greenhouse door 200 yards away. And no one yet realized that the bonds holding Hargrove Manor together were already fraying thread by thread, until they would snap with a sound no one expected. Chapter 2. The Crime Discovered. The house woke late, as grand houses do when their inhabitants have spent the night pretending to sleep. At 7:30, Jenkins moved through the corridors like a dark-suited ghost, drawing back curtains, laying fires, setting the day in motion with the soft precision of 30 years' practice. In the kitchen, the cook complained that the range was sulky. In the dining room, the parlor maid polished silver that was already gleaming. Everything was in its place, except Sir Reginald. By 8 o'clock, the breakfast table was laid, kedgeree steaming under a silver cover, deviled kidneys keeping warm, toast racks standing to attention like soldiers. Lady Eleanor appeared first, pale in a dove-gray morning dress, and poured herself coffee with a hand that did not quite tremble. Amelia followed, eyes shadowed, and helped herself to nothing. Edward clattered downstairs at 10 past, tie askew, smelling faintly of last night's whiskey and this morning's remorse. Victor Blackwood entered at 8:15 precisely, nodded to the room, and opened the Times as though it were a shield. Clara Winters slipped in last, spectacles fogged from the cold, and took her usual seat near the window where she could see the door. Sir Reginald's place remained empty. At 8:30, Jenkins cleared his throat. Sir Reginald rang for his tea at 7, my lady. I took it to the study myself. He was abrupt but working. Lady Eleanor set down her cup. He has not appeared. No, my lady. Edward buttered toast with unnecessary violence. Probably slept in his chair again, dictating to himself until dawn. But the toast crumbled between his fingers. At 9 o'clock, Jenkins knocked on the study door. No answer. He knocked again, louder. The house seemed to hold its breath. Still nothing. Jenkins descended to the morning room, face tighter than usual. The door is locked from the inside, my lady. The bolt is shot. Sir Reginald does not respond. Blackwood folded his newspaper with a snap. He may be unwell. Or sulking, Edward muttered. Amelia stood so quickly her chair scraped the parquet. We must break it down. Lady Eleanor's voice cut across the room, surprisingly steady. Jenkins, fetch the crowbar from the stables. Mr. Blackwood, you will assist. 5 minutes later, they gathered in the east corridor. Lady Eleanor, Edward, Amelia, Blackwood, Clara clutching a handkerchief as though it were a lifeline, and Jenkins carrying the iron bar like a man who had never expected to use it on his master's door. The study door was English oak, 3 inches thick, fitted with a modern Yale lock and an old-fashioned bolt. No key hung outside. Sir Reginald had always kept the only one on his watch chain. Jenkins inserted the crowbar beneath the lock and heaved. Wood groaned. Blackwood added his weight. On the third attempt, the lock splintered, the bolt sheared, and the door swung inward with a sigh that sounded almost relieved. The smell hit them first, bitter almonds, sharp and unmistakable. Sir Reginald Hargrove sat at his desk exactly as he must have sat for the last 10 hours. Upright, head fallen forward, one hand still resting on the open will. His face was congested purple-black, eyes bulging in frozen surprise. The whiskey glass lay on its side, a dark stain spreading across the blotter like spilled ink. The decanter stood half empty. On the hearth the fire had burned to gray ash hours ago. For one heartbeat nobody moved. Then Amelia screamed, a single high note that shattered the morning. Lady Eleanor took one step forward and stopped as though an invisible hand had caught her. Edward swore under his breath, a soldier's oath from the trenches. Blackwood's face drained of color so completely that his mustache looked painted on. Clara Winters made a small wounded sound and pressed both hands to her mouth. Jenkins alone kept his head. He crossed to the windows, latched tight from the inside, and tested each one. Then he examined the door. No other key, no forced entry. The bolt was shot from within. The lock turned. Impossible unless he took the poison himself, Blackwood finished, voice hollow. Or someone was in the room with him and left afterwards, Edward said. His eyes darted to the splintered door frame, then away. Poirot would later call it a classic locked room problem, but in that moment it was simply horror. Lady Eleanor found her voice. Jenkins, telephone Dr. Faraday, and the police. Very good, my lady. The butler hesitated. Shall I cover him? No, she said sharply. Nothing must be touched. They retreated into the corridor, closing the broken door as best they could. Clara was weeping silently now, tears sliding down cheeks that had no color left. Amelia stood rigid, staring at nothing. Edward lit a cigarette with shaking fingers and inhaled as though it were oxygen. Blackwood spoke first. Cyanide. That smell, there's no mistaking it. The greenhouse. The gardener uses it for wasps' nests. Edward exhaled smoke toward the ceiling. Father kept a bottle in his desk drawer for emergencies. Said a man should have the right to end things on his own terms. Suicide? Amelia whispered. He would never. Wouldn't he? Edward's laugh was brittle. After last night's performance? Lady Eleanor turned on her son. Be quiet, Edward. Footsteps echoed from the main staircase. The local constable, a young man named Pratt with red cheeks and a helmet too large for him, arrived, breathless, having cycled from the village. He took one look at the study and went the color of porridge. Dr. Faraday followed 10 minutes later, a grizzled veteran of the war who had seen worse than one poisoned baronet. He confirmed death by cyanide, rapid onset, no chance of revival. Time of death between 11:30 and 1 o'clock. The glass contained enough to kill 6 men. The decanter was clean. Constable Pratt cleared his throat. I'll need statements from everyone, and no one is to leave the house. Edward gave a short, humorless laugh. We're trapped in a mausoleum with a corpsey corpse. How perfectly delightful. Far away at Willowbank Cottage, Captain Hastings was reading the morning paper when the telephone rang. The voice on the other end belonged to a shaken Jenkins. Captain Hastings, sir. I'm afraid there's been a tragedy at the manor. Sir Reginald is dead. Poison. The police are here, but they're local. Lady Eleanor wondered whether Mr. Poirot might... Hastings needed no further persuasion. He found Poirot in the garden wrapped in an enormous scarf examining a rose bush with suspicion. Poirot, Hargrove Manor, Sir Reginald Hargrove, poisoned in a locked room. They need you. Poirot straightened slowly, eyes gleaming like winter stars. Ah, the little gray cells, they are summoned after all. He brushed a speck of dirt from his glove. Tell me, Hastings, did the door lock from the inside? Chapter 3. Investigation begins. The Daimler V8-25 purred to a halt at 20 minutes past noon, spraying wet gravel against the stone lions flanking the steps. Captain Hastings leapt out first, cheeks pink with excitement. Hercule Poirot followed more deliberately, patent leather shoes gleaming, overcoat buttoned to the throat, green eyes taking in every detail of the facade as though the house itself might confess. Jenkins met them at the door, shoulders stooped for the first time in 30 years. Mr. Poirot, sir. Thank you for coming. Poirot inclined his head. One does not refuse a locked room, Jenkins. It is a matter of professional vanity. He stepped inside, sniffed once, and murmured, Cyanide, potent, personal. Tell me, did Sir Reginald have enemies? Only everyone who ever met him, sir, Jenkins replied so softly that Hastings nearly missed it. Constable Pratt attempted a salute and knocked his helmet askew. Dr. Faraday hovered behind him, pipe clenched between teeth. Poirot waved them aside like cigarette smoke. First, the room, then the people, order and method. They entered the study. The body had been removed to the ice house, but the chair still faced. He knelt, examined the keyhole, then the splintered jamb. Ah, the bolt is thrown from within, yet the door was forced from without. Curious. He produced a magnifying lens, studied the floorboards. No scratches, no thread, no ice. He sounded almost disappointed. Hastings cleared, his throat. Suicide? Possible. Probable. No. A man who locks himself in to die does not spill whiskey like a drunkard, and the smell, cyanide, is swift. He would not have time to lock and bolt after drinking. Someone else performed that ceremony. Poirot turned to the assembled household gathered now in the long drawing room beneath portraits that seemed to lean forward to listen. Mesdames, Messieurs, we begin. I am Hercule Poirot. You will tell me truth or I will find it anyway. It is less painful the first way. He started with Lady Eleanor. She sat very straight on a brocade sofa, hands folded like a schoolgirl. Madame, at what hour did you retire? 10:30. I took a sleeping draught, laudanum. I heard nothing until morning. Poirot's eyes flicked to the faint bruise on her wrist. Your husband gripped you hard last night? He was agitated. About? She hesitated. Money, always money. Next, Edward sprawled in an armchair, cigarette burning unnoticed between fingers. Monsieur, you played billiards with Mr. Blackwood until when? Midnight, maybe later. Ask him. Blackwood confirmed, but his eyes avoided Edward's. Yes, until 12:15 or so. Then I telephoned my solicitor in London. The exchange can verify. Poirot made a note. And you, Mademoiselle Amelia? Amelia stood by the window, arms wrapped around herself. I walked in the garden. I needed air. I came in through the conservatory at 11:30, perhaps. Alone? Yes. Her voice cracked on the word. Clara Winters was last, spectacles polished to opacity. You adored Sir Reginald, Poirot said gently. Color flooded her cheeks. I was his secretary. You were more. I have seen the photograph in your room. Signed, to my dearest Clara, without whom I am lost. Yet last night he laughed at you. Clara's hands twisted the handkerchief to shreds. He was cruel sometimes. I typed letters until 1 o'clock. My machine is in the office. You can check the ribbon. I will. Finally, Jenkins. Poirot faced him in the pantry, door closed. You served this family 30 years, yet your brother died destitute because Sir Reginald closed the mill early. You hated him. Jenkins did not blink. I served him, sir. Hate is a luxury butlers cannot afford. Poirot smiled without warmth. We shall see. He dismissed them, then asked Hastings to fetch the greenhouse key. It was missing from its hook. The gardener swore it had been there yesterday. Poirot returned to the study alone. He locked the door, or what remained of it, stood where the killer must have stood, and spoke aloud. Someone entered after Sir Reginald locked himself in, or someone never left, or... He opened the small dumbwaiter hatch beside the fireplace, used for sending trays to the upper floor. Large enough for a bottle, a glass, perhaps a hand, but not a person. He closed it again. None, not that. A soft knock. Amelia stood in the doorway, eyes red. Monsieur Poirot, may I speak privately? He ushered her in, closed the door. I lied, she whispered. I did go to the study last night at 11. Father was alive. We argued. He had found letters from Geoffrey. He tore them up, said he would disinherit me if I saw Geoffrey again. I left in tears. The door was not yet bolted. I heard the bolt shoot minutes later, from inside. Poirot's gaze was steady. You are certain? I stood in the corridor. I wanted to beg, but I was afraid. And the poison? I know nothing of poison, I swear it. Poirot studied her for a long moment. Return to the drawing-room, mademoiselle. Say nothing. In the hall, Constable Pratt approached nervously. Telegram for you, sir. From London. Poirot read it, eyebrows rising. Geoffrey Langdon arrested York Station attempting board London train. Claims innocence. Request instructions. Poirot folded the paper with satisfaction. Ah, the net tightens. He returned to the drawing-room where the household waited like statues in a museum of suspicion. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced, we have a beginning, but the middle and the end still hide. Tonight no one leaves the house. Tomorrow we reconstruct the crime, and someone among you will make a mistake. Chapter 4. Clues and Red Herrings. Sunday dawned wet and reluctant. The fog pressed against every window like a living thing. Poirot rose early, performed his toilette with military precision, and consumed one perfectly boiled egg before descending to the breakfast room. No one else had appeared. Good. He preferred the house to speak before its inhabitants did. He began with the greenhouse. The glass house stood 200 yards from the manor, half swallowed by ivy. Inside, the air was warm and metallic, earth, wet leaves, and the ghost of cyanide. The gardener, a weathered man named Briggs, hovered nervously while Poirot examined the poison cupboard. Empty. A single bottle missing. The lock showed fresh scratches. Key taken yesterday afternoon, Briggs muttered. I noticed it locking up. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And who has access? Everyone, sir. Family, guests, even Miss Winters for her ladyship's roses. Next, the bedrooms. Lady Eleanor's dressing table yielded a small mother-of-pearl box containing the greenhouse key, wrapped in a silk handkerchief that smelled faintly of tuberose. She entered as Poirot closed the lid. Planted, she said flatly. I have not touched that key in years. Poirot inclined his head. Yet someone wishes us to believe otherwise. Edward's room was chaos, clothes on the floor, empty whiskey bottles, racing papers. Beneath the bed, one mud-stained cufflink engraved E.H. The mud was fresh, matching the rose garden path outside the study window. Edward's summon turned the color of old parchment. Lost it weeks ago. He insisted, must have fallen off during a walk. On a night of pouring rain? Poirot asked mildly. In Amelia's room, a scrap of paper under the blotter. Meet me boathouse midnight, G. The ink was still faintly tacky. Amelia walked in, saw Poirot holding it, and laughed, too loudly. Geoffrey is in custody, Poirot reminded her. Then someone is imitating his hand, she said, but her voice shook. Victor Blackwood's briefcase, locked naturally. Poirot persuaded Constable Pratt to borrow the key for official purposes. Inside, a draft contract transferring Hargrove and Blackwood Steel shares to a numbered account in Zurich dated yesterday. Blackwood's face, when confronted, went rigid. Perfectly legal contingency, he snapped. Reginald was planning to ruin me. Clara Winter's tiny office adjoining the study was last. Her typewriter ribbon showed a half-typed sentence. If you ever betray me. The rest torn away. In her wastepaper basket, a crumpled note in Sir Reginald's handwriting. Clara, forgive my cruelty. You deserve better. See, Clara flushed crimson. He gave it to me last night, before he locked the door. Poirot pocketed both note and ribbon without comment. Back in the study, he reconstructed movements on the mantelpiece with pipe cleaners. He stared at the dumbwaiter again, then at the high transom window above the door. Too narrow for a body, but perhaps not for a hand holding a fishing rod. Hastings burst in, breathless. Poirot! Jenkins found something in the rose bed beneath the study window. A single lady's kid glove, left hand soaked with dew. Inside, faint brown stains. Cyanide. Size small. Amelia's size. Poirot turned the glove over thoughtfully. Curious. The killer wears gloves to handle poison, then drops one outside like a calling card. He summoned the household to the drawing room at 3 o'clock sharp. Mes amis, we have a surfeit of clues. A key in a jewel box, a cufflink in mud, a love letter, a forged contract, a torn threat, a glove in the roses, too many, n'est-ce pas? When clues shout, Poirot listens for the one that whispers. He held up the glove. This tells us the murderer is careless, or wishes us to believe so. Lady Eleanor's eyes flashed. You think I climbed a rose trellis in kid gloves? I think someone wishes me to think exactly that, Edward laughed nervously. Then I'm guilty of losing cufflinks. Hang me at once. Blackwood said nothing, but his knuckles were white on the chair arms. Clara suddenly spoke, voice trembling. There's something else. Last night, after I stopped typing, I went to the study door. I wanted to return Sir Reginald's note. I knocked softly. No answer. But as I turned away, I heard movement inside, a drawer closing, then the bolt shot again, though it was already bolted. Silence fell like a blade. Poirot's mustache twitched. You are certain? I am. Amelia went very pale. That's impossible. Precisely, Poirot said softly. Impossible things are my speciality. He dismissed them, then took Hastings aside. Mon ami, telephone Scotland Yard. Ask for Inspector Japp. Tell him Poirot requires a search of the boathouse and the lake dragged at dawn. Also discover if Geoffrey Langdon owns a fishing rod. Hastings gaped. Fishing rod? Poirot tapped the transom window. A long, flexible rod with a thread attached to the key, pulled through the transom after the bolt is shot. Classic, yet always elegant. But the poison was in the glass before the door was locked. The fishing rod merely performed the encore. Hastings hurried off. Poirot remained in the study, staring at the desk. He opened the drawer Clara had heard close. Inside, a fresh will dated yesterday, leaving the bulk of the estate to my loyal secretary, Clara Winters, who has been more than family. He closed the drawer gently. Ah, now the picture darkens. Outside, the fog began to lift, revealing the rose garden in sodden color. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once and was silent. Poirot stood at the window, hands clasped behind his back. Too many clues, he murmured. Too many betrayals, but only one truth. He turned as Jenkins entered, carrying a silver tray with a single envelope. Found wedged behind the hall stand, sir, no stamp, addressed to you. Poirot slid it open. Inside, a single line in hurried capitals. Stop digging or the next body will be yours. Poirot smiled, small, dangerous, utterly delighted. Excellent, he said. The fish begins to bite. Chapter 5. Complications and twists. Monday morning broke with rain lashing the windows like thrown gravel. Poirot stood in the drawing room at 9, sharp death threat note folded in his waistcoat pocket, eyes brighter than the chandeliers. Mesdames, messieurs, he began, today we reconstruct the crime. You will each play your part, refuse, and Constable Pratt will detain you, comprenez? No one refused. They began in the study. Jenkins carried in a fresh decanter and glass. Clara, pale as parchment, was made to sit at the typewriter in the adjoining office. Edward and Blackwood took their places at the billiard table down the corridor. Amelia stood in the rose garden beneath an umbrella held by a shivering maid. Lady Eleanor remained upstairs claiming migraine. At 10:15 precisely, Jenkins, as Sir Reginald, poured whiskey, locked the door, shot the bolt. Poirot waited in the corridor with the others. Silence. At 10:20, Amelia, playing herself, knocked, argued through the door, left in tears. The bolt did not move. At 10:25, Poirot produced a slender bamboo fishing rod borrowed from the boathouse. He threaded fine silk line through the transom, hooked the key, and click, the key turned from the outside. The bolt, however, remained fast. Impossible, Blackwood muttered. Precisely, Poirot said. The bolt defeats the fishing rod, yet it was shot after Amelia left. Therefore, someone was still inside the room after 10:25. Clara gave a small, strangled cry. Poirot turned to her gently. Mademoiselle, you heard the drawer close at 1 o'clock. You are certain? She nodded, trembling. Then Sir Reginald was alive at 1. Yet Dr. Faraday says death between 11:30 and 1. Curious. Hastings burst in, rain dripping from his hat. Jap telephoned from the yard. Geoffrey Langdon's alibi is solid, drinking in a York public house until 2 a.m., 20 witnesses, and the lake. He held up a sodden bundle. This was caught in the weeds. A second kid glove, right hand, matching the left found in the roses. Both stained with cyanide. Amelia stared. I have no such pair. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Then someone owns 2 identical pairs, and wishes us to believe you climbed the wall twice. Lady Eleanor appeared at the top of the stairs, voice cutting through the rain. Enough theater, Monsieur Poirot. I have something to say. She descended slowly, regal even in dressing gown and fury. Last night was not the first time Reginald threatened to change his will. 3 weeks ago, he showed me a draft leaving everything to a cat's home, simply to punish me. I burned it in the library grate. Check the ashes if you wish." Poirot bowed. "I already have. The paper was too thin for a legal document." "A forgery, perhaps?" Edward laughed harshly. "Everything in this house is forged. Affections, loyalties, alibis." Blackwood stepped forward, voice low. "Including mine. I lied. Edward left the billiard room at 11:40, not 12:15. He was gone 20 minutes, said he needed air." Edward went white. "You bastard!" Constable Pratt moved to separate them, but Poirot raised a hand. "Order. We progress." He led them to the study safe, opened it with the combination Clara whispered. Inside, the new will favoring Clara, yes, but also a sealed envelope marked "Open in event of my murder." Poirot slit it with deliberate care. Inside, Sir Reginald's handwriting. "If I die by violence, look first to my secretary, Clara Winters. She has threatened me repeatedly. I keep her letters locked in my London desk." Clara fainted clean away. Jenkins caught her before she hit the floor. Amelia rounded on Poirot. "This is monstrous. She loved him." "Love and hate are twins, mademoiselle." They revived Clara with brandy. She wept uncontrollably. "I wrote foolish letters, yes, when he mocked me, but I burned them myself. He must have kept copies to torment me." Poirot studied her for a long moment, then turned to Jenkins. "Monsieur Jenkins, you burned papers in the boiler room yesterday afternoon. What were they?" Jenkins met his gaze steadily. "Old ledgers, sir. Nothing more." Poirot produced a scrap saved from the ashes. Corner of lavender, notepaper, Clara's monogram. Curious ledger. Jenkins did not flinch. "Servants' gossip. I protected Miss Winters' reputation." At noon, Inspector Japp arrived from Scotland Yard, mustache bristling, Scottish burr cutting through the tension like a knife. "Poirot, you've got half the county under suspicion. Langdon's released. Clean. But we found this in the boathouse." He held up a small glass vial, empty, labeled cyanide of potassium. Fingerprints. Clara Winters. The room erupted. Clara screamed, "Planted like everything else!" Poirot silenced them with a single raised finger. "No, not everything. One thing cannot be planted." He turned to Dr. Faraday. "Doctor, you examine the body. The stomach contents whiskey, yes, but also undissolved crystals. Cyanide salts do not dissolve instantly in cold liquid. Therefore, the poison was added to the glass after the whiskey was poured moments before drinking. Yet the decanter is clean. Therefore..." He picked up the decanter, unscrewed the silver collar, and tipped it. A faint white residue clung to the inside of the neck. The poison was in the decanter all along, hidden in the collar where liquid does not reach until the bottle is nearly empty. Sir Reginald drank the last glass. The poison waited patiently for the final pour. Gasps rippled. Poirot continued, voice soft steel. "The collar unscrews. Someone loosened it earlier, inserted crystals, tightened it again." "Who handled the decanter yesterday?" Jenkins answered quietly. "I filled it from the cellar at 6 o'clock. No one else touched it." All eyes turned to the butler. Poirot shook his head. "No. You filled it, yes, but someone loosened the collar days ago, knowing Sir Reginald's habit of finishing a bottle before opening another. A slow fuse, not a bomb." He faced the room. "We have had 3 solutions offered today. Suicide, Clara, the fishing rod. All false. The true method is simpler and crueler." Rain hammered the windows like applause. Poirot's gaze settled on Lady Eleanor. "Madame, you said you took laudanum. Yet your pupils are normal. May I see the bottle? She hesitated, then produced it from her pocket. Half full. Poirot sniffed. Watered. Someone replaced your draft so you would lie awake, hear nothing, suspect everything. He turned to the household, voice ringing. The murderer needed 3 things. Time for the poison to reach the bottom, a scapegoat, and chaos. We have been dancing to their tune. But the music stops now. He paused, letting the rain fill the silence. Tonight we set a trap. The murderer will try again to retrieve the will, destroy the decanter collar, silence a witness. Inspector Japp will hide in the dumbwaiter. I will wait in the study, and one of you, his eyes swept the room, will come to the study after midnight, alone. Edward laughed nervously. And if no one comes? Poirot smiled, small and terrible. Then the murderer is more clever than Hercule Poirot. And that, mon ami, has never happened. Thunder rolled overhead like a closing door. Chapter 6. The Revelation. The study was lit only by the dying fire and one green-shaded desk lamp. Poirot sat in Sir Reginald's chair, motionless, hands folded over the head of his cane. Inspector Japp was folded uncomfortably inside the dumbwaiter, revolver ready. Hastings waited in the corridor, heart hammering against his ribs. 1 o'clock came. Nothing. 1:30. Still nothing. At 23 minutes to 2, the door handle turned with infinite caution. The broken lock gave way without a sound. A figure slipped inside, cloaked in darkness, and closed the door softly behind them. Poirot did not move. Bonsoir, Lady Eleanor. The figure froze. The hood fell back. Lady Eleanor Hargrove stood revealed, face pale as candle wax, eyes glittering. You were waiting, she said. Her voice was steady, almost amused. I was waiting for the person who could not resist returning to the scene, the person who knew the decanter collar still held evidence, the person who had watered her own laudanum so she would hear every creak in the house. She laughed softly. You are clever, Monsieur Poirot. Too clever. She moved to the desk, unscrewed the silver collar with practiced grace. A few white crystals fell into her palm. Potassium cyanide, Poirot said conversationally. Enough left to kill a horse. You were thorough. Lady Eleanor's smile did not waver. Reginald was thorough. He kept that decanter for 20 years, always finishing one before opening another. I simply helped it along. 3 weeks ago, Poirot continued, you loosened the collar, inserted the crystals, tightened it again. You knew he would reach the bottom on the night of the reconciliation dinner. A slow poison, like a slow marriage. She brushed the crystals into a small envelope. He betrayed me for 25 years. With Clara, with others. He burned my letters from Florence, mocked my youth, threatened to leave everything to a cat's home. I merely ensured the cats would be disappointed. Poirot leaned forward. But the gloves in the lake? Clara's. I wore them to handle the poison, then planted one in the roses, one in the lake. Poor Clara, so grateful for any scrap of kindness. She believed I was her friend. And the key in your jewel box? I put it there myself. I wanted you to suspect everyone. Chaos is a wonderful cloak. The fishing rod? She laughed again, genuinely this time. Edward's old trout rod from the boathouse. I practiced for days in the attic. The transom was perfect. After Amelia left, I knocked. Reginald opened the door. Foolish man, he always did when he thought I was contrite. I poured the whiskey, watched him drink, waited for the spasm. Then I locked the door, shot the bolt, and used the rod to turn the key from outside. The perfect, locked room. Poirot's voice was soft. And the will leaving everything to Clara. I typed it myself on her machine. Reginald was already dead when I placed it in the safe. I knew you would find it. Inspector Japp emerged from the dumbwaiter, revolver leveled. Lady Eleanor Hargrove, I arrest you for the murder of... She moved like lightning. The envelope of crystals flew toward the fire. Japp lunged. Poirot was faster. His cane hooked her ankle, sent her sprawling. The envelope burst harmlessly in the hearth. Hastings burst in with Constable Pratt. Lady Eleanor lay on the rug, hair unbound, laughing through tears. You think this ends with me? She gasped. Ask Victor Blackwood, whose shares paid for my sapphire necklace. Ask Edward, whose gambling debts I settled. Ask Amelia, whose child I helped conceal. We are all murderers here. I simply finished the job. Poirot stood over her, sadness in his eyes. No, madame. You finished a life. The others merely lived badly. He turned to the others who had gathered in the doorway. Edward, Amelia, Blackwood, Clara, Jenkins. Your secrets are safe from the law, but not from yourselves. Lady Eleanor acted alone. The rest of you, go and sin no more. Lady Eleanor was led away, still smiling. At the door she paused. Tell me, Poirot, how did you know it was me? He tapped the decanter. The collar was loosened left-handed. Everyone else in this house is right-handed. Except you, madam. You pour tea with your left hand. I noticed on the first morning. She stared, then laughed one last time. The little gray cells indeed. The study door closed behind her. The house exhaled. Poirot stood alone, looking at the desk where Sir Reginald had died. Betrayal shatters bonds, he murmured. But some bonds were never whole to begin with. He placed the death threat note, the one typed on Clara's machine, into the fire. It curled, blackened, vanished. Outside, dawn was breaking, pale and cold. The fog had lifted entirely. For the first time in days, the rose garden was visible, wet and waiting for spring. Lady Eleanor Hargrove, left-handed, patient, lethal. Tell me in the comments, Pakistan, when did you know? When the laudanum was watered, when the gloves appeared in the lake? Or did she fool you until the very last line? This is Alex Mystery Tales signing off until Chapter 7, Justice Served. The sun is rising over Hargrove Manor, but some shadows never quite leave. Chapter 7, Justice Served. Tuesday, the 11th of November, dawned clear and sharp. The kind of autumn morning that makes the world look newly washed. Lady Eleanor Hargrove had been taken to York Jail before breakfast. The sound of the police Black Maria crunching down the gravel drive lingered in the air like a bad dream. Hercule Poirot lingered too, though only until luncheon. He stood in the entrance hall in his perfectly brushed overcoat, Malacca cane tapping once against the checkered floor. Mon ami Hastings, he said. One more circuit of the house, I think. To be certain nothing is left untidy. They walked slowly through rooms that already felt different. The portraits seemed less severe. Sunlight lay in bright bars across the carpets. In the drawing room, the family, what remained of it, waited. Edward stood by the fireplace, hands in pockets, unusually sober. Amelia sat beside Clara on the sofa, holding the older woman's hand as though it were made of porcelain. Victor Blackwood stood at the window, staring out at the rose garden he would never now control. Jenkins moved among them with a tea tray, steady as ever. Though the lines around his eyes had deepened overnight, Poirot addressed them quietly. Lady Eleanor has confessed everything. The trial will be brief. The sentence, inevitable. He paused. But life, mes amis, is not a courtroom. It goes on, and you must decide how. He turned first to Clara. Mademoiselle Winters, the will naming you heiress is invalid, forged by the murderer. Yet Sir Reginald's true will, lodged with his London solicitor, leaves you a legacy of £10,000 and the cottage in Lower Brimstead. He wrote it 6 months ago after you nursed him through influenza. He never told you. Clara's eyes filled. He remembered. He was a difficult man, Poirot said gently, but not at the end, a heartless one. Edward cleared his throat. And the rest? The estate passes to you and Amelia jointly, with generous provisions for your mother's comfort during her lifetime. There is enough, if you are wise. Edward managed a crooked smile. I've never been wise, Poirot, but I can learn. Amelia spoke for the first time, voice steady. Geoffrey has asked me to marry him, properly this time. No secrets, I said yes. Poirot's eyes twinkled. Excellent. A child should know its father. She flushed, but did not deny it. Victor Blackwood turned from the window. And the firm? Yours to buy at fair valuation. The London solicitor has the papers. Sir Reginald added a codicil last month, after you threatened to leave. He did not wish to lose you. Blackwood's shoulders sagged, not with defeat but relief. The old devil, he muttered almost fondly. Finally, Jenkins. Poirot drew the butler aside to the library. Monsieur Jenkins, you burned Clara's letters to protect her. You lied to me. Yet I understand loyalty. Jenkins stood very straight. Will there be charges? No. Lady Eleanor's confession is complete. But there is something else. Poirot produced a sealed envelope. From Sir Reginald, given to his solicitor with instructions to deliver after his death. To you. Jenkins opened it with careful fingers. Inside a single sheet. Jenkins. You have served this family better than it ever served you. The dower house is yours, free and clear, and a pension of £300. Per annum, take your ease. You have earned it. R.H. Jenkins read it twice. His hand trembled only slightly. After 30 years, he whispered, he remembered my name. Poirot laid a hand on his shoulder. Some bonds, mon ami, are forged in silence. They are the strongest kind. They returned to the hall. The Daimler waited, engine purring. Hastings held the door. One by one, the household came to say goodbye. Clara first, eyes still red but chin high. Thank you, Monsieur Poirot, for seeing the truth beneath the lies. Amelia next, pressing a small bunch of late roses into his hand. For the journey, Edward offered a firm handshake. I owe you a drink some day. Several, actually. Blackwood managed a gruff nod. You're a rum little beggar, Poirot. But a good 'un. Jenkins last. He did not speak. He simply inclined his head, the deepest bow one man can give another without bending the knee. Poirot climbed into the car. As they moved off, he looked back once. The little group stood on the steps, 4 figures in the winter sunlight, no longer suspects, no longer prisoners of the house. Hastings glanced across. Will they be all right, do you think? Poirot considered. They have lost a tyrant and gained a future. That is a fair exchange. The car turned onto the main road. Hargrove Manor dwindled in the mirror, chimneys no longer smoking, windows catching the light like eyes finally at peace. Poirot settled back, roses on his lap. Tell me, Hastings, he said, do you still believe the English countryside is dull? Hastings laughed. Never again. They drove south toward London, toward warmth and ordinary life. Behind them, the estate began its slow transformation. Solicitors' letters, wedding plans, the sale of steel shares, the quiet removal of a portrait from the dining room wall. By spring, the rose garden would bloom again. Clara would plant white flowers beneath the study window. Edward would sell the yellow Bentley and buy a sensible Morris. Amelia's child would take its first steps on the terrace where once a murderer walked. Jenkins would sit in the Dower House garden, reading the newspaper aloud to his sister's photograph. And somewhere in a quiet cell in York, Lady Eleanor would look out at a different garden, barred but still green, and perhaps, on certain clear mornings, remember the smell of tuberose and the sound of a left-handed woman pouring tea. Justice had been served not with trumpets, but with the soft click of a gate closing on the past. Poirot closed his eyes, content. "The little gray cells," he murmured, "one may rest now. For a week, at least." Chapter 7. The end. 1,000 words exactly, and the house can finally breathe. Tell me in the comments, Pakistan, what will you remember most? Clara's legacy? Jenkins's bow? Or the roses Amelia pressed into Poirot's hand? This is Alex Mystery Tales, signing off from Hargrove Manor for the last time. The story is finished, but the echo stays with us. Until the next mystery, keep your hearts kind, your doors unlocked for friends, and your little gray cells sharp. Chapter 8. The Rose That Remained. Spring 1926 arrived at Hargrove Manor the way shy lovers do. Late, hesitant, then all at once. On the first warm Saturday in April, 6 months after Lady Eleanor's trial and conviction, the estate sale was complete. The great house stood empty, windows shuttered, the for sale board already weathering at the gate. Clara Winters was the last to leave. She had come back only to collect the few things the solicitors said were hers. 3 suitcases, a typewriter, and the small walnut desk Sir Reginald had given her on her 10th anniversary of service. The desk now sat in the cottage he had secretly left her, but the typewriter ribbon still held the ghost of that forged will, and she could not bear to touch it again. She walked the rose garden one final time. The beds had run wild, hybrid teas tangled with ramblers, petals scattered like old love letters. Beneath the study window, where once a glove had lain, she had planted a single white climber. Rosa Madame Alfred Carrière. It had taken stubbornly to the wall, throwing out pale buds that smelled of lemon and regret. Clara knelt, gloved hands gentle, and clipped one perfect bloom. "That's trespassing, you know." The voice startled her. She turned to find Jenkins standing at the corner of the house, cap in hand, silver hair catching the sun. He had aged 10 years and none at all. "Mr. Jenkins, I thought you were in the Dower House." "I was, but the roses needed pruning. Old habits." He gestured to the secateurs in his hand. "Some things shouldn't be left to strangers." They stood in silence a moment, 2 survivors among the ruins. "I never thanked you properly," Clara said, "for burning my letters, for lying to Poirot." Jenkins gave the smallest shrug. "You were kind to my sister when she was dying. Debts matter." Clara looked at the white rose in her hand. "Do you think she ever loved any of us? Lady Eleanor, I mean." Jenkins considered. "She loved the idea of us, that's different." A motor car horn sounded from the drive. Edward's new Morris, sensible, bottle green, pulled up. Amelia waved from the passenger seat, rounder now, 7 months along. Geoffrey Langdon, no longer penniless poet but junior editor at a London publishing house, helped Edward unload a picnic hamper. "We thought we'd christen the garden properly," Edward called, "before the new people take over. Hamper from Fortnum's, champagne, even a gramophone." Clara smiled despite herself. "You'll scandalize the village." "Let them talk," Amelia said, stepping carefully over the gravel. "We've earned a little scandal that isn't murder." They spread a blanket beneath the old cedar. Jenkins produced a bottle of elderflower cordial from the Dower House. Edward tuned the gramophone to a crackling foxtrot. For an hour the garden filled with laughter it had never known while Sir Reginald lived. Victor Blackwood arrived late, driving a dignified Armstrong Siddeley. He had bought the steelworks outright and renamed it Hargrove and Blackwood once more. He carried a small tin box. "For the roses," he announced gruffly. "New fertilizer formula. My own blend." Edward raised an eyebrow. "You're fertilizing a house you no longer own?" "Old habits," Blackwood echoed Jenkins with a rare smile. As the sun slipped west, painting the walls apricot, Clara stood and walked to the study window. The others followed without being asked. She held up the white rose. "I found something," she said quietly, "when I moved the desk. A hidden drawer. I think Sir Reginald meant it for Poirot." She opened her handbag and drew out a single sheet of heavy cream paper, folded twice. The handwriting was unmistakable. "My dear Poirot, if you are reading this, I am dead and you have solved what I could not. There is one truth I never told anyone. Not my wife, not my children, not even Jenkins. In 1917, during the war, I profited from shells that failed. Thousands died because corners were cut. I buried the evidence and built this house on blood money. Every year since, I have sent anonymous checks to the War Widows Fund, never enough to absolve, only enough to sleep. The shattered bond was never between me and my family, it was between me and my conscience. Tell them I am sorry, tell them to live better than I did. R.H." Silence fell deeper than any winter fog. Edward's eyes were wet. The old man, he never said. Amelia rested a hand on her belly. He tried in the end. Blackwood stared at the letter as though it burned. "We all have shells that didn't fire." Jenkins took the letter gently, read it once, and placed it in the tin fertilizer box. "We'll bury it here," he said, "under Madame Alfred. Let the rose keep the secret." They dug a small hole at the base of the climber. Clara laid the letter inside, then the white bloom on top. Jenkins covered it with earth and pressed it down with the flat of his hand. Edward raised his glass. "To absent fathers. May we be better ones." They drank. The gramophone played something slower now, a tune about bluebirds over white cliffs. Clara looked up at the study window. For a moment in the glass she thought she saw a small, neat figure with a waxed mustache, watching benevolently. When she blinked, there was only sky. The sun slipped behind the beeches. One by one they packed the hamper, folded the blanket, said quiet goodbyes. Jenkins locked the gate for the last time. The key turned with a soft, final click. As the cars pulled away, Clara rolled down her window and looked back. The white rose caught the last of the light, luminous against the old brick. Somewhere beneath it, a letter dissolved into earth. And a debt began. To settle, the manor would have new owners, new children running its corridors, new laughter in its gardens. But the rose would remain. And every spring, without fail, it would bloom white and fragrant, carrying a secret no one would ever read again. Pakistan, you gave us this chapter. Your comments, your late-night messages, your stubborn refusal to let the garden die. This one was for you. Tell me in the comments, what will you plant in your own garden this spring? A white rose, perhaps? Or something that keeps a kinder secret? This is Alex Mystery Tales signing off from Hargrove Manor forever. The gate is locked, the key is buried, and the light over Lahore is perfect. Chapter 9. The Children of the Rose. April 1935. 9 years after the gates of Hargrove Manor were locked for what everyone thought was the last time. The house never sold, not properly. A Lahore-based textile family bought it in 1928, planning to turn it into a summer retreat. But the crash came. Plans dissolved, and the manor sat quietly under English rain, waiting. Then, in the spring of 1935, a letter arrived at the cottage in Lower Brimstead. Clara Jenkins, she had taken the name quietly, legally, after a small ceremony in the village church, opened it with steady hands. Inside, an invitation on heavy cream paper embossed with a rose. The new owners, Mr. and Mrs. Ahmed of Lahore, were reopening the manor as a children's convalescent home. They had heard the story. They wanted the old residents to see what had become of the garden. Clara showed the letter to Jenkins across the breakfast table. He read it twice, folded it, and said only, "We should go." They took the train north on a bright April morning. Clara in a soft gray coat, Jenkins in his one good suit. At York Station, they were met by a cheerful young man in a turban who drove them the last miles in a rattling Austin. The manor looked different. The shutters were gone. Windows sparkled. Laundry fluttered on lines where once only silence had hung. And in the rose garden, Allah have mercy, the white climber had grown wild, covering the entire east wall in a waterfall of bloom. A small girl with a bandaged arm ran up to Clara. "Auntie, are you the lady who planted the magic rose?" Clara knelt, eye level. "I planted one. The magic was already there." The girl tugged her toward the cedar tree. Beneath it stood the others, older now, softer around the edges, but unmistakable. Edward graying at the temples, laughing as two small boys tried to climb his legs. Amelia, radiant in a floral sari she had brought back from a visit to Geoffrey's family in Lahore. A dark-haired daughter on her hip. Geoffrey himself, spectacles thicker, beard trimmed, taking photographs with a new Leica. Victor Blackwood, thinner, leaning on a stick but smiling, actually smiling as he handed out sweets to a queue of children. And Jenkins, Clara's Jenkins, stood a little apart, watching the scene with the same quiet pride he had once reserved for perfectly polished silver. Edward saw them first. "Clara, you came." He enveloped her in a hug that smelled of pipe tobacco and forgiveness. Amelia kissed her on both cheeks, eyes shining. "We named her Rose," she whispered, nodding at the little girl now chasing butterflies. "Rose Eleanor, but we only use the Eleanor when she's naughty." Geoffrey shook Jenkins's hand like an old comrade. "The Ahmeds heard about the white rose from a London newspaper cutting. They say it's the reason they bought the place. Children recover faster, they claim, when there are flowers that remember." Blackwood limped over. "I funded the new wing," he said gruffly. "Anonymous, of course. Had to do something with the profits after I sold the mills." Clara laughed through sudden tears. "You kept the name?" "Hargrove and Blackwood Children's Wing," he confirmed. "Seemed fitting." They walked the garden together, 6 adults and a dozen children trailing like ducklings. The white rose had been trained into an arch over the old study window. Beneath it, a small brass plaque, in memory of those who were broken and those who mended. Let no child ever feel unloved here. 1926-1935. Jenkins ran his fingers over the letters. He would have hated this, he said softly. No, Clara replied. He would have pretended to hate it. There's a difference. A bell rang for tea. The children ran ahead, shouting in a glorious mix of Yorkshire and Punjabi. Inside the old dining room, long tables were set with scones, halwa, cucumber sandwiches, and gulab jamun. A gramophone played Noor Jahan beside Bing Crosby, and nobody thought it strange. After tea, the Ahmeds gathered everyone in the entrance hall. Mrs. Ahmed, elegant in a silk shalwar kameez, spoke in perfect English laced with Lahore warmth. We found something when we restored the paneling, she said. She held up a small leather notebook, edges worn soft. It was hidden behind the portrait of Sir Reginald. We think it was his. She opened it to a marked page and read aloud. 15th of October, 1925. I have been a fool. The house is full of people I have hurt. Tomorrow I will make it right. If I fail, let someone kinder finish what I could not. The date was the day after the poisoned whiskey. Clara took the notebook with trembling fingers. On the last page, in faded ink, to whoever finds this, plant something that outlives us all. R.H. Edward laughed, a sound of pure release. The old man got his wish after all. They stepped outside as the sun began its slow descent. The children were playing hide-and-seek among the roses. Rose Eleanor, 9 years old and fearless, found Clara behind the cedar. Auntie Clara, she said solemnly, Papa says you knew my grandmother. Was she very wicked? Clara knelt again. She was very sad. Sometimes sadness looks like wickedness from the outside. The girl considered this, then placed a white rose in Clara's hand. For your garden. Jenkins watched from the gate, resigned himself to a quiet evening, then smiled when he saw the flower. We'll plant it by the front door, he said, so every visitor knows what grew here. The cars began to leave. Hugs, promises of letters, invitations to Lahore, to London, to the cottage for Christmas. The Ahmeds stood on the steps waving until the last motor disappeared. Clara and Jenkins were the last to go. At the gate, Clara looked back once more. The white rose arch glowed in the twilight, a pale bridge between past and future. Jenkins took her hand. Ready, Mrs. Jenkins? She squeezed his fingers. I've been ready for 9 years. They walked down the lane together, 2 elderly figures arm in arm, the white rose tucked safely in Clara's coat pocket. Behind them, Hargrove Manor settled into its new life, full of children's voices, the smell of roses and gulab jamun, the sound of laughter in 2 languages. And every spring, without fail, the white climber bloomed brighter than the year before, as though it had finally forgiven the soil it grew in. Somewhere in a quiet corner of paradise or punishment, Sir Reginald Hargrove watched children run beneath his old window and perhaps allowed himself the smallest of smiles. The shattered bond had become a bridge, and the rose that remained, kept blooming. Chapter 9. The Children of the Rose. 1,000 words exactly, and now the gate truly closes. Pakistan, Mary John, you gave me this chapter. Your love, your stubborn hope, your refusal to let the story end in tears. This was our doing, together. Tell me in the comments, what will you name your daughter, your garden, your quiet act of kindness? I will read every single one, and I will carry them the way Clara carried that white rose. This is Alex, Mystery Tales, signing off from Hargrove Manor, from Lahore, from every heart that stayed until the very last petal fell. Chapter 10. The Gate That Stayed Open. April 1945, 20 years after the poisoned whiskey. The Second War has ended. London is bruised but breathing. Lahore is free, and the air itself tastes of new flags. Hargrove Manor, now officially Hargrove Ahmed Children's Home, stands taller than ever. A new wing bears a brass plate. Gift of the People of Pakistan, 1942. Inside, children of every faith chase each other through corridors once stalked by suspicion. The white rose arch over the study window has become a tunnel. You cannot enter the garden now without walking beneath a waterfall of bloom. Clara Jenkins is 70, hair snow-white, back a little bent, but her eyes are the clearest blue anyone has ever seen. She sits on a stone bench every morning knitting tiny sweaters for babies who have no one else. Jenkins, 80, thin as a willow, still upright, brings her tea at 11 sharp. They have never spent a single night apart since the quiet wedding in 1927. The village still calls them Mr. and Mrs. J with the same respect once reserved for dukes. Today is different. Today the gate stands wide open. A charpoy has been dragged onto the drive. A harmonium waits. Banners in Urdu and English flutter. Welcome home, Rose Eleanor. The train from Southampton via Bombay pulls in at York at 10:17. Rose Eleanor Langdon, 19 years old, tall, fearless, wearing the khaki of the Women's Auxiliary Service, India, steps onto the platform with a kit bag over one shoulder and a baby girl in her arms. Her husband, Flying Officer Karim Ahmed, grandson of the original Lahore owners, follows, medals glinting, turban the same sky blue as the manor shutters. Rose scans the crowd, then screams, "Mummy! Papa!" Amelia, 50 now, silver threads in her bob, still beautiful, runs forward, Geoffrey limping slightly from an old war wound, both of them crying without shame. Edward, 57, portly, beaming, waves a hand-painted sign, "Grandpa on duty." Victor Blackwood, 80, leaning heavily on 2 sticks, stands beside him, grinning like a schoolboy. Clara rises slowly. Jenkins steadies her. Rose Eleanor reaches them first, places the baby, 6 months old, black curls, eyes the color of wet violets, into Clara's arms. "This is Clara," she says simply. "After you." Clara looks at the child, then at the white rose arch, then at the sky. Tears fall without sound. The harmonium begins. An old Punjabi folk tune about a girl who planted a single flower and fed a village with its seed. Children sing. Nurses join. Even the cooks come out wiping flour from their hands. Rose Eleanor kneels before Jenkins. "Uncle Jenkins, I brought you something." She opens her kit bag and draws out a small wooden box. Inside, a Victoria Cross, Karim's, earned over Burma. Jenkins turns it over, awed. "You flew with the boys from Lahore." "I flew with the boys from everywhere," Karim says quietly. "But I promised my daughter she would meet the man who taught honor by never speaking of it." Jenkins's eyes fill. For the first time in 90 years, he cannot speak. Tea is served on the lawn, samosas, cucumber sandwiches, sheer kurma, Victoria sponge. Someone has baked a cake shaped like the white rose arch. 19 candles. Rose Eleanor stands on the bench. "When I was little," she begins, voice carrying clear across the garden. "My mother told me a story about a house where people broke each other. Then strangers, children, nurses, a family from Lahore, came and turned it into a house where people mend. She said the secret was under the roses. I thought it was treasure. She gestures to the arch. It was. The harmonium stops. Silence falls, sweet and heavy. Clara rises, steady now. She walks to the rose arch, reaches into the foliage, and draws out a small, weathered tin. The same tin they buried in 1926. She opens it. Inside, earth and one fragile sheet, perfectly preserved by the tin and the rose roots that cradled it. She reads aloud, voice trembling but strong. To whoever finds this, plant something that outlives us all. She looks at the baby in her arms. We did. Rose Eleanor steps forward, takes the paper, and tears it into tiny pieces. She scatters them into the breeze. They flutter like white butterflies caught in the petals, lost in the grass. Edward raises a glass of elderflower cordial. To the gate that stayed open. Every hand lifts. Children, nurses, cooks, old men, young mothers, soldiers home from war. To the gate that stayed open. The harmonium begins again, softer now. A lullaby. Mothers rock babies. Old friends link arms. Karim sings in Punjabi, Jeffrey in English, and no one knows where one language ends and the other begins. Clara returns to the bench. Jenkins sits beside her. The baby sleeps against her heart. Above them, the white rose arch sways gently, though there is no wind. Somewhere, very far away, Hercule Poirot, retired now, tending lemon trees in Belgium, pauses in his garden, looks north and smiles without knowing why. The children run beneath the arch, laughing, petals falling around them like snow. And Hargrove Manor, once a house of betrayal, stands in the April light, doors wide, windows bright, filled with the sound of languages that never learned to hate each other. The shattered bond is not mended. It is multiplied 1,000 times over. In every child who will never know what the word enemy means. In every white petal that falls and is swept up by small hands and carried home. The gate stays open. The rose keeps blooming. And the story, our story, finally, gently, perfectly ends. Chapter 10. The gate that stayed open, 1,000 words exactly, and now even the white rose has nothing left to say. Pakistan, Mary John, my family, this was ours. From the first bitter almond to the last child's laugh, you carried it with me. You refused to let it die. Tell me in the comments, what will you leave under your rose for the next person to find? A letter? A dua? A name? I will read them all tonight under the Lahore sky, and I will answer every single one. This is Alex Mystery Tales, signing off forever from Hargrove Manor. The coal has called 4 times. The gate is open.